Hello and welcome back, everybody. It's the No Name Cinema Society Sound Off, our freeform segment. It is the Sound Off time. We got a bunch of fun segments for you. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Jonathan Betzler. As you can see, I am back at my ex's in Playa del Rey, California. She is traveling, so I'm cat sitting. You might be able to see Ginger, the cat, is still here behind me, and so that's kind of exciting. And I'm drinking alone tonight because, with J Money gone, I'm on my own. I've got Full Sail here sponsoring the show tonight, sort of. So with that said, I've also got a new hat debuting tonight. The basketball season's a couple weeks old, so I got my little Brooklyn Nets hat. Just got it a couple weeks ago in the mail off Amazon, and I'm very excited debuting the new hat. It's very comfy. So anyway, for those of you that are new to Sound Off, this is our freeform segment. It's, we have some fun things going on. It's just discussions, picking up errors and omissions, things that we missed in previous episodes, things like that. And as always on the Sound Off, my top 5, and I'll explain that later on. It's a different top 5 each time. Before we get to that, let me introduce my co-host. After missing his very first episode, he's back with us, ladies and gentlemen. Drunk Davie.
You're not drinking alone. The fine folks at Dasani are also sponsoring us this evening.
That's very exciting. We could use a double sponsor, and it works too because they're not like competitors with each other. So it's like we can have 2 sponsors at the same time. So Davie, did you watch our show on hair?
No, I don't.
Not even remotely. And back with us again, ladies and gentlemen, Jim Carroll, former Jeopardy champ. And I'm going to bring it up every time, Jim.
Every time.
And Jim's been with us the last few episodes and with us for a few more at least. So, Jim, welcome back. How are you feeling today?
I'm good. Look, I also am drinking, as this is fine municipal tap water, and I too have a hat right there. It's the Netflix.
Daredevil hat?
It is a Daredevil hat. I picked one up a couple of weeks ago at Comic-Con, and I meant to show it to you last time.
Wouldn't that be like at least a month or so ago now? 6 weeks ago?
Yeah, I mean, time is funny.
Time sure is funny. You got that right. Here, ladies and gentlemen, is the evening schedule. I always call it that. Here's the schedule for this set of episodes, our 43rd set of episodes. For our Indie Spotlight, we did Ruby Sparks. That was Davie, Jim, and I. We had Devin join us for our discussion of Hair, our classic movie discussion. And, of course, now is the Sound Off. As you can see, Davie's got his diatribe. I've got a second run of a movie that we've talked about. And these guys have assigned me to do the top 5 counterculture movies based on our discussion of Hair. Each time, one of our movies that we discuss, either the current feature, the Indie Spotlight, or the classic, leads to what my top 5 is. And so this time, it's top 5 counterculture movies. Another challenging one, but I'm excited to dig into it with these guys. All right, so that brings us to our next segment, which is the return. We haven't done this in a long time. Davie's Diatribe, everybody! And so for those of you who don't know, Davie's Diatribe is basically I have some topics that I'm going to show to Davie, and he picks one, and then he talks about industry topic and sort of lets you know how he feels about it. Sort of an open, opinion segment. Davie. So Davie, are you ready and excited for the return of the Diatribe?
Oh, you bet.
All right. I can tell your excitement.
Yeah, man.
You're so expressive sometimes. It's hard to deal with.
I know.
You know what I mean?
All the time.
I've got the 3 topics here numbered. 1, 2, and 3. And so Davie chooses a number, and then I flip the card around, and he gets his topic. So what is it, Davie?
2.
2. Which one's 2? Okay, 2. Here we go. And the topic is Summer 2017. Wrapping up the summer. It's November, but we never talked about, and a lot of the industry is talking about the summer of 2017 and how it's been going, and the results which how do you feel about usually the summer movies are the big movies of the year, not so much this year. Davey, how do you feel about summer of 2017, the films of the summer?
Yeah, there were some good ones. I think that
and that was Davey's diatribe, everybody. Thank you very much.
All right.
It never gets old. I'm telling you.
It does get old.
Only to you. The audience loves it. Anyway, go ahead, Davey.
So I think it was like some of the crazy thing is some of the ones that made the bigger impression on me were the smaller movies than the blockbusters. But yeah, I mean, I guess what were the major disappointments? I know The Mummy did not fare very well. I actually didn't see The Mummy yet.
Well, me either. But do you guys remember the days when if a movie made $100 million at the domestic box office, that was kind of like a big deal? Do you remember those days?
Yeah.
This year, 22 movies, 100 million. And that's as of a few days ago when I did this research. And 8 movies have made over 200 million and made over 300 million. That's just domestic. It's crazy to think about, you know, because I mean, remember like when a movie crossed 100 million, that was the big threshold. But of the top 10 this year, 5 of them are released outside of the summer months. The Memorial Day to Labor Day is considered the summer movie season. 5 of the top 10 were released outside of that. It's kind of abnormal. Davey, like, is that a trend or is that an anomaly?
No, I think it is. I think it is a trend. I think it's going to stretch out the big budget films. I think it's tough to why if you're spending all this money on these movies, why pit them all against each other? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think they're stretching out. I think Christmas is getting to be close to just more summer, and then the summer starting early. It's starting in spring.
That's true. A lot of these movies were in April, or some of them. I mean, the biggest movie of the year was released in March, or maybe in February. Actually, I'm trying to remember. Do you guys know when Beauty and the Beast was released? Is it February or March? Jim, you've got kids.
I did not see Beauty and the Beast. I think it might have been February.
Your daughters definitely saw this movie, and your wife definitely saw this movie.
Yeah. Vic took the kids, all the kids, by herself.
I bet. You're thinking it makes sense to you, David, to stretch this stuff out.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the old days where no one had air conditioning and the movie theater was a place to kind of get away from the heat. I mean, that's kind of over. So,
as a side question, are there too many movies at Christmas at this point?
We may be getting there. Because it's tough to fit them all in. You only get so many days off, and what do you know off the top of your head? This Christmas is pretty packed, right? I mean, I know there's a Star Wars
the big one, of course, is The Last Jedi is coming. The Greatest Showman comes to mind with Hugh Jackman, which is another musical, Davey. But you only like modern musicals, I believe, right?
Sure, something like that.
You watch La La Land, but not
Hair. No.
We did talk about you in the Hair discussion. I, Tonya, with the Tonya Harding story. Pitch Perfect 3 is coming out. Father Figures.
Right. That's a lot.
Dragonheart 4. The Dick Cheney drama from Adam McKay. The Paul Thomas Anderson's got another movie coming out. Downsizing, Alexander Payne's new film with Matt Damon.
That one looks interesting.
Back to the summer movie season real quick. How do you feel about some of the bigger blockbusters? Do they live up to quality? Or, like, I know the smaller films are appealing to you. I mean, the summer blockbusters, the big money makers, they were of lower quality to you, just generally speaking?
I mean, I thought Spider-Man was okay. I didn't find it memorable. Guardians was okay.
Guardians 2, Wonder Woman?
Wonder Woman, I think.
Which we were supposed to do a show?
Wonder Woman was the standout for me as far as the blockbusters go. And I like the Hitman's Bodyguard. It was fun. Mediocre was, I think, most of them, I'd say.
Which explains potentially, why the summer wasn't as strong financially, perhaps?
Oh, I think so. And I think they kind of thwarted some of the plans. I don't know. Are they going to still do that Universal Monsters universe thing, or is that pretty much put to bed?
Russell Crowe is like in The Mummy, and he was sort of set up for like a new one, right? Is that the idea?
Oh, all right. Well, that movie kind of broke even, right? I don't think it took a beating or anything.
I'd have to check the foreign numbers. It does very well overseas, and therefore...
There's a lot of movies like that. The Ice Age movies, nobody in the United States is watching those things anymore, but they still make lots of money overseas.
So, Davey, just to give you some idea of some of the summer movies that you may not be thinking about, Despicable Me 3, we talked about Guardians of the Galaxy, Wonder Woman, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales, Transformers: The Last Night, War for the Planet of the Apes, Cars 3, All those, did not do too well, at least stateside. The big surprise, I think, of the year stateside is and success, the 9th highest grossing film of the year and a summer movie is Dunkirk, is sort of the outlier in many ways.
Yeah, I love Dunkirk, and I liked Hitman's Bodyguard. Probably because I didn't expect to like it. I didn't see a lot of. God, I did a poor job. This is the first Transformers movie I haven't seen in the theater.
I gave up on the Transformers franchise after the second one. And I used to, as a kid, the Transformers were my favorite. I was so excited, even in spite of Michael Bay, and Michael Bay, of course, ruined it. We do have to move on, but I want to let Jim, do you have any comments about anything we just said? I know it's been Davie's diatribe, but.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Dunkirk might be the outlier because there was nothing else like Dunkirk for the summer. So it's sort of a palate cleanser.
There rarely ever is something in the summer like Dunkirk.
Yeah. I agree that they're going to continue to space out those huge franchise movies just to eliminate risk. Movies is an all-season business now, and we're going to continue to see them push into what is traditionally the dumping season of late August and January. I think what we're going to start seeing franchises move earlier into February and eventually January, and then they've pretty much already taken August and probably move into September for back to school.
Yeah. And one of the bigger movies of next year, I remember I saw a trailer for it, and is it Black Panther maybe? Something comes out like March 18th, and I was like, wow. It's almost like...
I think Deadpool was February.
Deadpool was always February. The original Deadpool was February, but that was not expected to do as well as it did. That was like sort of a surprise hit, if you will. You wonder if Deadpool would have gotten lost if it wasn't released in February. That's another thing altogether. It's interesting you talk about the franchises, Jim, because that sort of relates to another question that was on one of these cards. And movie studios are thinking less about movie stars and more about franchises. Like actors are not opening movies the way they used to, and I wanted to get Davie's opinion on that. But that will have to wait for another sound off because this is the end of Davie's diatribe. There you go, Davie. How do you feel? You got it all off your chest?
Oh yeah, feel great.
Excellent. All right, so it's now time for our second segment of the evening, and this is what we call the second run. And what the second run is a movie comes up in conversation or in a top 5 or something like that, and one of us hasn't seen it. So that one has to go and see it. That is what's going on now. Tonight's movie is a movie called What Did You Do in the War, Daddy? And the reason we're doing this movie as a second run is in our 1966 interview, Jay Money brought it up. I told a story about how I had purchased it to watch on Amazon for the 1966 interview, but the purchase wouldn't go through, and I called Amazon, and they gave me my money back, and I tried to do it again, and it still wouldn't go through, so I gave up on What Did You Do in the War, Daddy, and didn't get to see it. And then it came up again in episode 40.4, where we counted down our top of 1966. Each of us did this. Davie and I had the same number 1 movie, which was, Davie?
1966 is Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, was it?
Yeah. Davie and I both had Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, but Jay Money had this film, Who in the War, Daddy, as his number 1 movie of 1966, over Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which he had at number 2. And you can go back and look at that episode. In fact, here's a clip from that episode.
It's funny because for me, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of movies that come out in 66 that we've seen and that we talked about that are really dealing with parody and also heavy issues in terms of war. And to me, it's almost like this is like the level of comedy and sort of it's farcical level to the next step in this movie is what I think they were trying to do with The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. A film that also takes the idea of war and turns it on its head and makes it ridiculous and talks about how ridiculous the idea of everything is in this situation. And
it's a Blake Edwards film, which is always interesting to some degree.
I don't know. It's certainly not as heavy as some of the other films we talked about. It doesn't have credibility as some of the other films we talked about. It's the one I like the most from 1966. That's why it's number 1 for me.
It's definitely going to do a second run on it sometime in the future. So I went back and I watched the film just the other day, and these guys said they might as well. Davie, did you watch What Did You Do in the War, Daddy?
No.
Jim, did you watch What Did You Do in the War, Daddy?
I did. I got through about 3/4 of it.
Why'd you stop?
I did. Children.
Okay. It's not a movie quality issue.
Yes, it was not a quality issue. It was I have 3 children issue.
Yeah. I'm curious. The ending is interesting, so I'd be curious what you think about that. But I'm going to summarize it for you guys real quick. And it's hard to summarize, but I'll do my best. Basically, a ragtag company of soldiers during World War II are assigned a new by-the-book captain whose job it is to take a Sicilian town whose soldiers and inhabitants don't seem to realize or care whether there is a war on or not. So, Jim, the 3/4 that you saw, how did you find? What did you do in the war, Daddy?
I thought it was fine. I don't know if I would have made it a Best Picture category. It seems like it was later outdone by a lot of other war movies. Maybe this was a sort of precedent.
Right. The screenplay was really interesting. It started really slow, but for me, it turned a corner at the first plot point. Once it gets rolling, I feel like it's very, very funny. And I should say here, by the way, that it's directed by famous comic director Blake Edwards, best known for the Pink Panther series, Breakfast at Tiffany's, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. J Money suggested that it was satire, but I found it to be more farce than satire, like mistaken identity, near misses, misinterpretations, light fun, but no real anti-war or socio-political subtext. Am I off base there?
No, I completely agree with you. It's 100% farce.
The lack of satire, because that was the point J Money was really trying to make, and I didn't see that here.
I think the closest you can get to satire is just how sort of screwed up the armies operate, that they have to go by these nonsensical regulations that have no practical application. It's sort of what, when the rubber meets the road, it doesn't work out. Like some sort of anti-war messaging in there. But
I mean, anti-war messages is sort of lazy too, because it's more than just, you know what I mean? Like a lot. It's very easy to be anti-war in movies.
Yeah, but I mean, like, what, 4 or 5 years later, MASH did it a lot better than this could have ever attempted to do.
4 years, and I mean, again, I come back to The Russians Are Coming, which you did not see. Davie hasn't seen it either, and maybe Jim, you can watch it for a future sound off, and bring it up, because we know Davie won't. You laugh, Davie, but Jim actually likes watching movies, and even old ones. So it doesn't feel like homework to him.
Okay.
He's incredulous.
Have fun. Enjoy.
To your point, Jim, overall, I feel like it almost felt like an extended and more accomplished episode of Hogan's Heroes. And that's not necessarily a knock. It's just the style that was set up. I mean, it's sure Hogan's Heroes had its anti-war moments, but it's really not the crux of it like it is for something like Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, for example. And you'd have to see it to know what I mean. The audience knows what I'm talking about.
Well, and the characters. I mean, we see James Coburn as the irreverent leader, he doesn't care about rules. You see that done 3 years later with The Dirty Dozen and Lee Marvin, better, where it's a guy who gets a job done.
So actually, only 1 year later, Dirty Dozen was 1967.
Oh, was it? I thought it was 1969. So there you go. 1 year later, you have Dirty Dozen. I feel like we're seeing a lot of these actors before they ended up doing their best stuff, like Dick Shaw.
Well, we'll get to the actors in a moment. I want to finish the screenplay because I do think there's some good things in the screenplay. I think it does a great job of finding obstacles for our heroes and finding clever solutions to those obstacles. Mm-hmm. And I think there's great details throughout the screenplay, some really inventive ideas from a comic perspective. I think the communists were a stroke of genius, the bank robbers, Harry Morgan going around in the catacombs, speaking of MASH, coming full circle, and the body switching concept at the end, which I don't know if you even got to that part. Did you get to the body switching?
I've gotten to them having to stage the fight.
You've got a ways to go then.
I have about 40 minutes left.
Okay.
Right after this show, I will go back to watching.
Not going to do us any good.
Oh, can we do a second run? Next time?
Let's do it. Let's totally. I will only do that, Davie, if you watch this movie and you opine on it.
Nah, forget about it.
I knew that would shut him up. Let's get to Harry Morgan roaming around the catacombs.
Yes, I did get to Harry Morgan roaming around the catacombs, and I did love the bank robbers as a device. Yeah,
and that the catacombs thing pays off as well. Direction, and I've talked about this maybe not in the show before because Blake Edwards hasn't come up, but Blake Edwards is a master at large crowd / party scenes in terms of blocking and detail and humor. He knows to get the most out of these scenes. The apartment party in Breakfast at Tiffany's is a classic example of what he can do, and there's a couple examples in this film as well. There's a festival at the beginning of the movie in the first act that the staging of it is fabulous, and the way he cuts around the party and all the things going on, the way he juggles those things. There's tremendous detail throughout the mise-en-scène in both that. And the other example is what Jim just brought up. The fake battle, I think, is a stroke of Blake Edwards at his best.
And I will say, James Coburn is great in the movie. Like he really keeps that movie going and pulls it. I have less love for Dick Shawn as the captain.
You're jumping ahead of me. I'm talking direction right now, my man. I'm talking about the fake battle scene. I have a whole paragraph about the performances. You can't jump ahead on me. Stay in the lane here, man.
All right, stay focused. I completely agree with you about the direction. I think the party scenes are great. Well, and what made me think about what caused me to jump was when you were talking about the festival scene with James Coburn taking the Italian captain and redirecting him away from the little mayor and his daughter. And
yeah, I'm gonna have dreams about that daughter for a few weeks now. But the other thing, in terms of, just to finish up Blake Edwards' work, the framing is another thing he does very, very well. The composing of the frames are very detailed, especially for a comedy. You don't get that very much. On the flip side, though, the lighting seemed a little moody for this kind of tone. My other issue with Blake Edwards' direction is there is one major performance issue, and that Jim just brought up. So, Jim, that's your segue to Dick Shawn.
So yeah, I mean, look, I love Dick Shawn. The Producers is a favorite of mine. I think as LSD,
that's his claim to fame on film anyway.
Right, that's the magnum opus right there. But I think for this, that the problem is that he is a clown, and he worked better in the later.
He's a nightclub act. Might as well have been on vaudeville, you know.
Yeah, the later scenes where he's more comfortable, where he was losing it a little bit, like when he ate the telegram and he's wearing the hat. They're funny bits, but it doesn't really jibe with the style of the movie at that moment. And as a straight man in the beginning, he felt kind of wooden. He wasn't comfortable playing that. He wasn't right in that role.
I completely agree, and I have several notes on him. Over the top is the main thing. He really hams it up, especially in the beginning. And he's a detraction. He's like the primary detraction for the movie for me, and a distraction, quite frankly, in this movie.
Yep.
I've got a fun Dick Shawn fact at the end of this. I don't know how fun it is, but just to finish up with the performances, James Coburn is good. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know if I even call him great, but to argue against J Money, even though he's not here, I don't know if it's a supporting performance, and certainly not worthy of the best supporting performance of the year. And I know I've only seen, Jim hasn't seen as many 1966 movies as I have. But I mean, James Coburn is the best supporting actor of 1966. Seems like a stretch to me, both in terms of it's not a supporting performance and it's good but not great. Jim, you liked him, but is it Oscar worthy?
I mean, no, not Oscar worthy. But for what he does to keep that movie on track, like, this is the thing. You know, if Dick Shawn, who I believe he has the title billing in that movie, right?
James Coburn's first, and then Dick Shawn.
Okay, then yeah, because James Coburn, he keeps that whole movie going. Whenever Dick Shawn was on screen, James Coburn came in and rescued that scene. He kept that whole train moving. I
think everybody in the film is good except for Dick Shawn. It's almost like Dick Shawn didn't feel comfortable on screen yet, because I think the Producers is 69, maybe 68. Yeah, I mean, he just seemed out of place, and he wasn't ready for this kind of a role or movie or anything. Like he didn't even seem like a real actor to me.
But given that, when you were asking about supporting role, given those parameters, James Coburn is not a supporting actor in this film. He was the lead. He kept that movie.
But yeah, I really liked a lot of the character actors in the movie. Oppo, the Italian, Minnow, Rizzo, played by Aldo Ray. Like, I thought they really added to the story.
Absolutely. I mean, Aldo Ray's a treat. So
just to wrap things up here, overall, I feel like the film is somewhat successful, but hardly groundbreaking, and not even remotely one of the best of the year. That's how I'd sort of sum it up. Jim?
Yeah, it's a fine war movie. It's funny where it needs to be. I'm not going to remember this movie, and it's not going to affect future movies for me. But it's fine. It's fine.
It's fine. Now here's my, I don't know how fun it is. My Dick Shawn tidbit is, Dick Shawn, as I mentioned, was a nightclub act, comedian, lounge act, singer, performance artist, if you will. Some say he was ahead of his time in that regard, almost like an Andy Kaufman type figure. And so when he actually died on stage performing one night, the audience thought it was part of the gag, and he laid there for an hour or so before they realized that he was actually not actually breathing. So that's the sad end to the Dick Shawn story.
That is horrifying. Thank you.
Yeah. And so I thought I'd lighten things up, guys. Davie said wow, but he was muted when he said it. So do you want to say wow again, Davie?
Wow. That was.
Now, Davie, was that at least that was somewhat? You don't normally find my tidbits interesting. At least that was maybe a little interesting.
Was that like a closer? Or, I mean, was he like he's like, I'm doing this. They're gonna remember this one, or?
Oh, you're saying he did die on stage on purpose? No, I don't think that's.
I'm asking. I mean,
I don't think that's what happened. You guys ready to move on to the final segment of the evening?
Yeah, you bet.
I am ready.
This is going to be an intense top five, ladies and gentlemen. It's my top 5 counterculture movies. Interestingly enough, we just talked about a 1966 film. In 1966 films, 2 more of them will play a role in this segment. And it was another challenging top 5. Counterculture films, of course, based on our discussion of Hair. That's what we're doing now. I had to really rack my brain on this one. As I worried about putting the list together, I turned on the TV and somehow TCM was having a literal marathon of hippie movies, which I helped to make this project easier. I wound up watching a ton of those that they showed that evening. But none of those actually made the list. But it was fascinating to see how different the bohemian lifestyle was depicted in the films of the time as opposed to the films after, including Hair. We talked a little bit about this on the episode on Hair. In a lot of the films that were made in the late 60s, hippies and the counterculture was almost depicted as pests, druggies, menaces, rather than either troubled youth or youth looking for enlightenment or youth thinking about cosmic energy. Like I said, none of those films made the top 5. So then I went to Webster to help me out, and they define counterculture like this: the culture and lifestyle of those people, especially among the young, who reject or oppose the dominant values and behavior of society. So this is beyond a list of hippie movies. It's a list that I think captures the spirit and the mood, feelings of a generation in turmoil. Okay, so that's my little preamble. You guys ready?
I'm ready.
Yeah.
Are you excited?
Woo!
I appreciate that, Jim. I really do. You'd be surprised how much I appreciate that. Okay, so now the first film on this list, number 5, is probably the most on the list. Ladies and gentlemen, number 5 would be, did it come up? There it is. Easy Rider is the number 5 film. Purists might be flabbergasted that this film isn't higher on the list, but I actually don't love this film. It does a great job of capturing the spirit of the generation and the animosity they encountered amongst the elder generation. The cinematography is amazing. I think it's Laszlo Kovacs. The music is terrific. Overall, I find the narrative meanders and the character development is lacking. And that's not really what they're going for, but I don't feel it as much. So it doesn't have as much emotional engagement. It's fascinating from a historical point of view as an artifact, but I'm not sure how effective it is as an actual narrative film. So guys, Easy Rider. Jim, what do you think?
This is the movie when you said, I'm looking at counterculture films. This was the first one that sprang to mind. I pretty much agree with you 100%. I've seen the film and sort of was iffy about it for most of the same reasons you just mentioned. It's the narrative doesn't really hold me. I don't find it incredibly compelling, and I agree with you that it's an artifact of the times, and I can see how important it was in that time. I don't know if it holds up in a great cinema sort of way.
So we need some disagreement on the show, so I'll turn to Davie. Easy Rider made the top 5, but it's not higher. What do you think?
I'm ashamed to admit that I have not seen Easy Rider.
Sound off! Second run coming up. Probably
Hope
not.
springs eternal.
I will say that
Mm,
Easy Rider has
interesting.
already advanced in the 60s bracket. It's one of the films that has already advanced to the Sweet 16. It had a first-round matchup with one of the films we talk about all the time, which is Hawaii, 1966, and it did knock out Hawaii. I think it also beat Good, Bad, and the Ugly to move to the Sweet 16. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, Easy Rider, I know for sure, is in the Sweet 16 of the 60s bracket. But it's only number 5 on my top 5 here. And Davey hasn't seen it, so he can't argue with me. So anyway.
I probably could.
Try anyway. So interestingly enough, the next film is also Peter Fonda on a motorcycle. Number 4 is called The Wild Angels, and it's actually one of our 1966 films. It's a film directed by none other than Roger Corman. I watched it for the 1966 project. It's an exploitative depiction of neo-Nazi biker gang in LA, co-starring Nancy Sinatra, Bruce Dern, and Bruce Dern's future wife, Diane Ladd. It's a problematic film. It's simultaneously fascinating, important, but also extremely disturbing. It's frustrating, but also impactful. The heroes are Nazis, they're racists, they're rapists, which makes it for very uncomfortable viewing, but entrancing enough to be more interesting to me than Easy Rider, for example. Corman doesn't necessarily condone this behavior, but he does seem to avoid moral judgment whatsoever, for better or worse. The result is chaos. Depiction of an avalanche that you can't stop, so you better run. And that's sort of what the film suggests about the youth of America in 1966. They're coming, and they're going to tear us all. They're going to tear it all down. There's tons of metaphors in the film that are extremely filmic. It's Corman at his best in that regard. Like, for example, one of my favorite examples is Bruce Dern. At one point early in the film, he unhooks a horse as if to let it go, set it free, but then watches as the horse doesn't go anywhere. And it's sort of representative of how we as Americans, how free do we really want to be? An example of one of those impactful moments. The screenplay doesn't bother to investigate what led these kids to this attitude or this behavior. Still, it's one of the key reasons it's on the list. And I do want to show a little clip. It has a very famous speech that perhaps best sums up the attitude of this generation.
Blessed be the name of the Lord.
The Lord never did nothing for the loser.
What?
What's all this stuff about the Lord gave and the Lord taketh away?
He gave him that most precious gift of life.
Oh, man, you're so full of bull you don't even know it.
It's true, the Lord gives life, and man can make of that what he will. Why, this young man could have made of his life any number of things.
Oh, yeah? Well, let me tell you something, Mother. Let me tell you what life made of him. About how life never let him alone to do what he wanted to do. About how life made him always be good, always pay the rent, and to shovel it. Oh, no, preach. Not children of God, but hell's angels.
How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer? Woe be unto them who call evil good and good evil. Thus said Isaiah.
Thus said Isaiah. Hey, man, do you ever say anything on your own?
Good heavens, Lucifer, don't tell us about evil being good and good being evil. It's absurd. It's ridiculous.
We don't call anything, man.
You just want to be left alone, dude.
Yeah, we don't want nobody telling us what to do. We don't want nobody pushing us around.
I apologize. But tell me, just what is it that you want to do?
Well, we want to be free. We want to be free to do what we want to do. We want to be free to ride. And we want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded. And we want to have a good time. And that's what we're going to do.
Well, when, baby? Let's go.
We're going to have a good time. We're going to have a party.
So that's the scene, it's the famous speech. And note how confused he was when asked what he really wants, and almost how hollow his words are. I think it's interesting. The other thing to note is that what immediately follows that scene is a huge orgy that involves a lot of rape. And you can see in the scene also the swastika and other elements like that. So, gentlemen, I know you haven't seen this movie. What did you think of the clip?
kind of left me a bit cold. I didn't think it was particularly interesting or well written, honestly. Sorry.
I don't. It's fine by me, but you can see how it sort of summed up the feelings of a generation, especially like I want to be free. We want to be free to get loaded, all that sort of stuff.
I think it definitely plays on that stereotype.
It's interesting to see how the imagery, how sort of casual that swastika is there, and 40 years later, how much more powerful that imagery is.
There's taboo, challenging moments throughout the film. Like I said, they're racist, they rape, and they steal. It's interesting, the depiction of these characters. They're not lovable at all, but somehow they, to the youth of the time, especially because of this speech. This speech was written down and replayed. It was sampled for a song by Primal Scream not too long ago. Speech alone has a life of its own. These characters were sort of championed to some degree at least in their quest for quote unquote freedom. The dark elements of this movie, and this sort of, to your point, Jim, how these movies sort of challenges modern day taboo stuff, is what makes it fascinating to me. Jim, did it make you want to watch the movie?
Yeah, actually, I mean, your lead-in made me want to watch the movie. The Bruce Stern untying the horse. I think I was sold off of that.
It's a good moment.
It's probably going to be very uncomfortable. But
and be prepared for an awful performance by Nancy Sinatra.
Based on everything else you said, if I can handle the everything else, I think I'll be able to deal with Nancy Sinatra.
Yeah. If you can stomach the racism and the swastikas, you can deal with Nancy Sinatra. Davey, I suppose you're not interested in this movie.
I think I'm out.
There's no hippies or bikers in this next film, but it is also from 1966. And it came up a little bit in their 1966 in review show. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lord Love a Duck is the name of this movie. And most of you probably never heard of it unless you've seen some of our previous shows. It is a satire movie. I consider it counterculture because of its blatant disregard of authority. It's a wild and truly satirical attack as opposed to What Did You Do in the War, Daddy, which was not as satirical. It's a satirical attack on the hypocrisy of the status quo. The duck in question is a fey trickster named Molly Muck, played by Roddy McDowall, who manipulates events to help grant the wishes of his beautiful classmate, played by Tuesday Weld. He ostensibly does this out of love, but he really doesn't seem sexually attracted to her at all. He seems more interested in the chaos he creates, almost like the Joker in Batman. The screenplay is not counterculture from what you'd normally think of in terms of anti-war, but it's anti a lot of other things, including abuse of authority, including it's anti-self-importance and self-obsession. It's anti-heteronormative sexual behavior. It's also anti-repression of sexuality and the way sexuality dictates behavior. Even the episodic structure of the film seems to be rebellion against conventional storytelling. Its surprising, destructive conclusion seems to suggest revolution of a sort, albeit in a funny and entertaining way. And one of the things that we talked about in the 1966 in review is how these darker issues were handled more comedically in films like this, and The Russians Are Coming, than taking them straight on as they would later in the 60s. The performances, Roddy McDowall, I don't normally enjoy him as an adult actor. I enjoy him as a kid actor in the 40s, but this is one of his better roles as an adult. He fails to give Molly Muck any dimension, but I'm not sure how three-dimensional he actually is. The character's more representative of something. And the same thing can be said from Tuesday Weld, who's stunning in this movie, but she's also a pawn in the screenwriter's screenwriter and director George Axelrod. She also has no dimension. But you may recall that I named Lola Albright the best supporting actress of 1966, who plays Tuesday Weld's mother in this film. She not only lands some of the best comic moments of the film, but definitely handles a surprising turn in the film's darkest and most honest moments. So that's Lord Love a Duck. I know there's no way Davey has seen it. It's come up before, and he just stared at me like he's doing now.
This one sounds interesting, though. This one I think I would watch. Not going to, but I would if forced.
Jim.
I have not seen this movie. It sounds very interesting.
Have you even heard of this movie?
I have never heard of this movie.
Are you going to seek it out now?
I might. It does sound interesting. I would put this on a list to watch.
Davey, when he says that, he actually means it.
We'll see. He's new. Don't let him down. Don't let him spirit.
Challenge is on.
Throwing more and more on the pile.
I just add more to your list, Davey. Eventually you'll get one and we'll celebrate. Maybe for my birthday or Christmas.
When's your birthday?
It's in June.
Yeah, all right, maybe.
On a 1966 show, we had a guest who had seen Lord Love a Duck, and he was not enthralled with it. But I also think he missed it. Like, he missed the deeper points of it, because on the surface, it is silly. But I mean, like, I feel like there's a lot going on underneath. Anyway, that leads me to my number 2 counterculture film, and this is another one that you might not think of as a counterculture film at first glance. Recent film on this list, and so there's a chance that Davie has even seen it. It's a 90s film. Ladies and gentlemen, number 2 film is Oliver Stone's The Doors. It's my favorite Oliver Stone film, actually, clearly his most underrated. It's more than just a biopic. In a way, Jim Morrison's arc is a perfect metaphor for the counterculture of the 60s. Noble, poetic, diluted by a drug-induced haze that permanently damaged its ideals and its legacy. Morrison's drug-fueled story and existential artfulness is also perfect for Stone's visual style. He has a great use of iconography throughout the film: Indian, lizards, landscape. He has a carefully drifting camera work. DP is Robert Richardson, that seems to put us in the mind of the rarely lucid Morrison. The screenplay avoids the trappings of most biopics. It focuses on character and journey and covers a lot of time period without ever losing that focus. Although the high period point of The Doors is actually only a real 4 or 5 year period. And I can't talk about The Doors without talking about the once-in-a-lifetime performance by Val Kilmer. Not only should he have been nominated for Best Actor in 1991, he also possibly should have won. It is an amazing, transformative piece of work, and it's hard to tell where Jim Morrison ends and Val Kilmer begins, actually. Meg Ryan is passable, although not particularly noteworthy, in a role that's sort of outside our norm, so props to her for trying it. And Kathleen Quinlan is also quite good in a supporting role. Is The Doors, ladies and gentlemen. Davie, I imagine you've at least seen that one.
Yeah, I've seen it. I saw it. I was in high school. I don't really remember it very well.
Do you remember thumbs up or thumbs down, at least?
I don't think I liked it, but I think I would like it now.
Okay. Jim?
I did. I saw this movie in the movie theater. And I will say, what has kept with me all of those years is exactly what you said. Val Kilmer and his performance as Jim Morrison. I think that it was absolutely amazing what he did with that character. Is
there any argument about this being considered a counterculture film, being what I feel like Jim Morrison represents?
Yes, it's a film of the counterculture. My only reservation in this is that this movie was made in '91, and it is so far outside what is going on in the world.
You could say the same thing about Hair 10 years later.
Yeah, but Hair is, at least there are people who that experience is alive and fresh, and there's a big difference between 10 years later and 25 years later.
I mean, that's true, but at the same time, I found that the depiction of the counterculture movement that was made in the films of the 60s were actually kind of off. Like, it felt very harsh, and I said in the open that it felt like they treated people like menaces and pests and druggies, and were sort of narrow-minded in that way. The hippies that were making their way into the movies of the time were not true representations, and neither was Hair. Hair went too far in the opposite direction, making them fun-loving, singing, park prancing, fools to some degree, silly, small kids. Whereas they're somewhere in the middle. And I out of all these films, in terms of depiction of a movement, being 25 years later almost gives it the balanced perspective. It's strange to say that about an Oliver Stone film, having balanced perspective, but that's true. I mean, it does seem to have, looking at it outside, but fairly.
It took that much time to get a balanced viewpoint. That maybe there is something in the negative portrayals, in the light. And
that's why I feel like Hair didn't work in that regard. That's why I feel like this is in between. Like,
yeah,
I don't think it raised them to a pedestal. I think it was honest and fair, critical, but also understanding the love and the poetry that was happening as a part of this movement, like understanding what it was really about.
Okay. So you're looking more at depiction of counterculture rather than movies of the counterculture.
Yes.
Okay, fair.
So yeah. All right. So that leads me to number one, and I don't have a lot of time left. So number one always gets shafted, but number one is a movie that these guys have probably seen. So it has that going for it. And again, it's not what you might think when it comes to counterculture. But if you really think about it, this movie is highly anti-authority, but it also represents what is at the core of this movement, if I may call it a movement. Enjoyment of life and appreciation of life, and love in the purest sense of the word. Ladies and gentlemen, my number one counterculture film from 1971, I believe it is. And what I'm talking about, here is a quick clip, one of my favorite scenes from the film.
You sure have a way with people.
Well, they're my species.
Look at these stars.
Hmm.
Maud?
Yes.
Here.
A gift. Harold loves Maud. And Maud loves Harold. This is the nicest present that I've received in years. So I always know where it is.
It's a beautiful scene, and it sort of hammers home this point about love and the true meaning of love. I think the screenplay is original, inventive, and most importantly, honest. It's perfectly structured without seeming that way. It flows beautifully. It's touching in that it refocuses on how we live our life, refocuses us on how we live our life. It's not just anti-authority, it's anti-ownership, it's anti-hypocrisy, and it's pro-living. And I was very careful not to say pro-life. It's pro-living, something that a lot of the other counterculture films miss. Obviously, the performance by Ruth Gordon, who incidentally is also in Lord Love a Duck, but Ruth Gordon gives an iconic portrayal as Maud, extremely nuanced and confident, and she gets a lot of props for that. But Bud Cort as Harold does not normally, probably because his career sputtered after this. It's still a very complex, multifaceted character that he handles wonderfully. He's not afraid to be vulnerable and naive. The joy of the performance is in the confusion of the character, typifying the youth of the late 60s and early 70s, perhaps the youth of any period. It's a nice balance of being an adult, but still being so young and inexperienced. And as a director, I can't imagine a director having a more delicate touch than Hal Ashby. He's a former editor that finds a tricky balance and tone here between the comedy and, quite frankly, the pathos of Harold and Maude. And you can't really talk about Harold and Maude really without mentioning the music by Cat Stevens and the famous song Sing Out that is connected with this movie and used perfectly by director Hal Ashby. Harold and Maude, my number one counterculture movie. So let's hear it. Davie, I imagine, has not seen it.
It's a heck of a guess, man.
Thank you. Jim, I bet you have.
I have. It's one of Vic's favorite movies too.
And for those who don't remember, Vic is Jim's longtime wife. So my last two number ones have been on Vic's top 10. Is that right?
I think so.
Is Annie Hall was the last
Oh
one.
yeah, so yeah, Annie Hall is I think her all-time favorite movie. But both of these movies were.
He said
litmus
all time,
tests.
not me, but still drinking.
Harold and Maude and Annie Hall were relationship litmus tests.
It's actually Becca's favorite
I
movie.
didn't like them.
Talk about girlfriends. You were saying, what do you think about Harold and Maude, aside from the litmus test?
I mean, I love it, actually. It is one of my favorite movies. You kind of hit on it. It teaches you about having a life worth living. Yes, there's mortality, there's death in the world, but you have to get out and you have to make something of your life. You have to live it the way that you want to live it. Be true to yourself.
Do you see my point about it being the ultimate counterculture movie? Maude is, if not the first hippie, the ultimate hippie in many ways.
I completely buy that argument. Yeah, I'm not going to fight you on this. Do you want me
maybe
to?
we're not going to get as much argument as we used to in the shows.
I'm sorry. I can try and
I
find
think
something.
J Money used to argue just for the sake of it. It's okay. So good. You're with me on this.
I am with you on this.
All right. So that's my top 5. Davey has seen one of the films, and it was 26 years ago that he saw it. So how do you guys feel about the 43rd set of episodes, Davey?
Feel great.
And Jim, Davey wasn't, but you were in all 4 of those episodes. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, look, it feels like it's the first ones I've ever done.
It's interesting that it would feel that way.
What have I gotten myself into? Is what he's thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Davey, do you miss J Money at all? Just a little bit. The arguments, the acrimony.
I'm a lot calmer. I'm a lot calmer. 2 years and go at it.
I guess that's a good thing. Folks, we will be back on Thursday, November 16th with a review of Murder on the Orient Express, our next current feature, and stay tuned on Twitter and Facebook, etc., for updates on what our Indie Spotlight and Classic are going to be. So our 44th set of episodes starts on November 16th, Murder on the Orient Express. Anything you want to say to the audience before we say goodnight, Davey?
No.
Closing thoughts, Jim?
I don't really have any closing thoughts.
You guys should come prepared with closing thoughts in the future, even something like quirky or like, or a catchphrase like "see you next time" or like something.
Yes.
Okay.
Next time I will come with closing thoughts. That will be my closing thought.
Okay, good.
I will come with closing thoughts.
Right after I watch Lord Love a Duck.
Now, but in fairness, you said you were actually intrigued by my pitch for Lord Love a Duck.
I did.
Okay.
I say a lot of things on the show.
You
man.
didn't mean it. Now I'm heartbroken. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, this meeting of the No Name Cinema Society is adjourned.